"You need to move that boat immediately or we'll have it towed." Those were the words yelled at me by a red-faced man in khaki shorts and a tucked-in polo shirt, standing on the edge of my private dock, my dock, waving a clipboard like he was leading a military operation. Behind him, a bunch of HOA members gathered, all dressed for their little weekend fishing party, acting like they owned the place. I was sitting on my boat, legs kicked up, coffee in hand, enjoying the quiet morning breeze drifting across the water. My German Shepherd Duke lay at my feet, yawning like this was just another boring Saturday. It was, until they showed up. "We've received multiple complaints," the man barked again, stepping onto the dock like he had authority. "This lake is under the HOA's control, and you can't park your boat here without a permit." That's when I stood up slowly and looked him in the eye. "I own the lake," I said. They froze. The air went dead silent. You could have heard a fish jump. I didn't flinch. "You what?" one woman gasped, nearly dropping her mimosa. "I own this lake," I repeated, each word as steady as the ripples on the water. And then I walked over to the boat's side panel, opened a waterproof lockbox, and pulled out a rolled-up document. My deed. The crowd stared, jaws hanging, eyes darting from me to the water, to each other. And just before I could hand it to him, I smiled and said, "I think you should sit down for this. Let's rewind." A few years ago, I bought this quiet piece of property at the edge of a newly developed community. It wasn't much back then, just some overgrown brush, a beat-up cabin, and a lake that had been forgotten by everyone except nature. No one cared about it. But I did. I'd been through a rough divorce and was looking for peace, not problems. The cabin gave me shelter. The lake gave me therapy. Every morning I'd wake up to the sounds of ducks splashing and dragonflies dancing on the water. I started fixing up the place, chopping wood, building a new dock, and eventually buying myself a used fishing boat named Liberty. I never joined the HOA. I didn't have to. My property was carved out years before the rest of the land was developed. That's something most people didn't know, especially not the HOA. They treated me like a weird old guy living in the woods. I was fine with that, until last summer, when they started using my lake for their fancy HOA fishing social Sundays. At first, I let it slide. I figured they were just enjoying the water like I did. But then they started bringing loud music, trash, and people who left beer bottles floating in the reeds, so I politely reminded them it was private property, and that's when things got ugly. The HOA president, Greg Burton, yep, the same clipboard-waving dude from the dock, sent me a letter stating I was in violation of community standards by mooring a non-regulated vessel on HOA property. That's right, they accused me of parking my own boat on their property, when it was actually my lake. I thought it was a misunderstanding. So I showed up at their next HOA meeting, deed in hand. Greg didn't even let me talk. Said, "We don't recognize external land claims without proper petition through the HOA board." External land claims? I left that meeting stunned. It was clear. They were either really stupid or really bold. So I decided to wait. I wanted to give them time to realize they'd made a mistake. But instead, they escalated. First, it was letters taped to my gate. Then it was HOA fines. They claimed my dock obstructed neighborhood lake view. And finally, they showed up with their fishing rods, lawn chairs, and cheap plastic coolers, acting like they owned everything. That morning when they marched onto my dock and tried to evict me from my own boat, I'd had enough. Greg tried to snatch the deed from my hand, but I pulled it back. "You know what?" I said calmly. "Let's call the sheriff. You bring your permits, I'll bring my deed. Let's see who leaves in cuffs." He backed off, muttering something about escalation not being necessary. The rest of the fishing party looked uncomfortable now. A few had already started packing up their gear. They knew. They'd realized something was wrong. But Greg wasn't done. "Then consider this your final warning," he snapped. "If that boat is still here tomorrow, it'll be towed." I laughed out loud. By who? You? Good luck dragging a 2-ton boat off a private lake. He stormed off, but I could see the gears turning in his head, and I knew Greg well enough to know he was about to try something even dumber. That night I installed cameras around the dock. I set up floodlights too. I wasn't going to be blindsided, and just as the sun began to rise the next day, Duke started barking. I grabbed my coat, rushed down to the dock, and froze. Greg was back. This time he'd brought a small barge crane. He was on a rented flatbed boat, hovering near the dock with 2 men I'd never seen before. They were shouting at each other, trying to figure out how to hook Liberty to their equipment. I hit the floodlights. Get off my property. They jumped. Greg turned, blinking in the light, and yelled, This is your last chance. We have HOA clearance. I raised my phone, already dialing the sheriff. You've made a huge mistake, I said. Then I pulled out the deed again, unfolded it right into the camera of the dock security system. But before I could hit send on the call, one of the men with Greg stepped forward and said something that made the whole dock go silent. Wait, this lake is under whose name? Greg hesitated, then lied. It's communal. It's on HOA records. The worker frowned. Then why does the county registry say it belongs to a Michael Lawson? I raised my hand. That's me. You should have seen Greg's face. He went pale. The workers started backing off, shaking their heads, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. But then, something worse happened. As they turned to leave, Greg, furious, red-faced, humiliated, kicked the dock railing. He slipped. And with a loud splash, the president of the HOA fell headfirst into the lake he swore he controlled. Everyone gasped, and that's when I noticed something floating next to him. A plastic cooler, the one full of drinks for their fishing party. And something inside it was moving. My heart dropped as I realized what it was. Greg's phone, the one that probably held all his plans, texts, and messages, now sinking to the bottom of my lake. And just like that, the fishing party was over. But what happened next after Greg climbed out of that water, dripping and fuming like a soaked raccoon, would change everything in the neighborhood forever. Greg stood there dripping wet, water pouring off him like a faucet, hair matted to his forehead. He looked like a soggy sandwich nobody wanted to eat. The entire HOA fishing crew stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to laugh, run, or pretend they weren't just part of what was probably the dumbest stunt their president had ever pulled. He tried to speak, but his words came out in wet coughs. His khakis clung to his legs like shrink wrap, and one of his flip-flops had floated off into the lake. "Get me a towel," he barked, looking at his crew, none of whom moved an inch. I stood on the dock, arms folded, Duke sitting beside me like a security guard on break. I wasn't smiling. Not anymore. "You trespassed. You attempted to remove private property. You endangered yourself and others," I said, my voice calm but loud enough for every person present to hear. "I have everything recorded, high resolution, audio, video, time-stamped. The sheriff is already on the way." That got their attention. One of the men Greg had brought along, clearly just a worker, raised both hands. "Sir, we were hired through an app. We were told this was a community issue. We didn't know it was private land." I nodded. "You'll need to tell that to the sheriff. I'm sure they'll want to know who sent you." Greg's face twisted. "You're making a huge deal out of this." I tilted my head. Oh, I haven't even started yet. And I hadn't. When the sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing across the trees, everyone tried to scatter like cockroaches. But I flagged the car down and made sure they stayed right where they were. Officer Ramirez, a local who'd known me for years, stepped out and walked straight over. "Mike," he said with a nod, then looked at Greg. "And you are?" Greg puffed up his chest like a soggy pigeon. "Greg Burton, HOA president. This man is illegally using HOA property." Officer Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Which property would that be?" "This lake," Greg snapped. "He docked a boat here without permission and he refuses to comply with community guidelines." I didn't say a word. I just handed the officer a folder. Ramirez flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Then he looked back up at Greg with the most unimpressed look I've ever seen. You do realize this deed says Mike owns the lake and the surrounding shoreline up to 50 feet? Greg blinked. That's not possible. Ramirez shrugged. It's been verified with the county. In fact, I believe there's a clear record showing the lake was part of a private acquisition when the developer sold this part of the land 20 years ago. You all just built around it. One of the HOA members gasped. Another quietly packed up her tackle box and muttered, I told y'all this was a bad idea. Greg turned beet red. Ramirez stepped closer to Greg. So let me get this straight. You trespassed, tried to remove a private citizen's property, lied about ownership, and endangered yourself and others by hiring unlicensed contractors to operate heavy machinery on a body of water you don't own, Greg stammered. I didn't know. I'm going to need you to come with me. The click of handcuffs echoed through the trees like a drumbeat. The rest of the HOA members just stood there, stunned. Greg tried to protest, but Ramirez had already started walking him toward the cruiser. Before he got in, Greg turned to me, rage boiling in his eyes. This isn't over, he spat. You'll regret embarrassing me like this. I just shook my head. It's not about embarrassment, Greg. It's about respect. You don't get to bully people just because you wear a badge that says President. As the squad car pulled away, silence settled over the lake. One of the ladies from the HOA walked up to me, a little hesitantly. Mr. Lawson, she said, we didn't know the lake wasn't part of the HOA. We thought it was communal. I tried to tell Greg, I said. He wouldn't listen. She nodded. If we'd known, we wouldn't have kept hosting the fishing socials here. I looked out over the water, the morning sun now rising high, sparkling across the lake like diamonds. I'm not against people enjoying the lake, I said slowly. I just wanted some respect. It's not about kicking people out, it's about being asked, not demanded. She looked embarrassed. Well, thank you for not pressing charges on all of us. I sighed. Just clean up the trash next time, all right? She smiled a little, nodded, and began gathering up the rest of the group. Within 10 minutes, the entire fishing party had packed up and left, leaving the dock quiet again. For a moment, I considered going back inside, but then I saw something on the far end of the lake, 2 teenage boys trying to drag an overturned kayak up onto shore. They looked like they were struggling, so I jogged over and gave them a hand. Thanks, mister, one said, wiping sweat off his brow. We didn't mean to tip it. We just wanted to try fishing a little. I smiled. You boys fish often? First time, the other said sheepishly. We didn't know if we were allowed to be here. I looked out over the lake again and thought about what just happened. Tell you what, I said. You two clean up the shoreline after you're done. Make sure no trash is left behind. They nodded eagerly. Then you're welcome to come back any time. Their faces lit up. I watched them paddle off, smiling and laughing like the world had just opened up for them. It felt good, doing something kind, giving someone a chance. But that peace didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a certified letter. It was from the HOA. They were demanding I appear before their disciplinary committee for violating community peace and safety. At the bottom, it was signed by the new acting HOA president, Greg's wife, and she wasn't coming to apologize. The envelope was thick. That told me everything I needed to know. HOAs never waste a stamp unless they think they've got something. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a full-blown coordinated attack. And now, with Greg temporarily out of the picture, and likely stewing in some holding cell or with his lawyer, it seemed his wife, Cynthia Burton, had stepped in to continue the circus. I sat down at my kitchen table, coffee cup in hand, Duke curled up by the door. I opened the letter carefully, almost curious to see how they'd spin this. Dear Mr. Lawson, you are hereby summoned to attend a mandatory disciplinary committee hearing regarding multiple violations of community peace, safety, and the improper use of shared community spaces. Date, Friday, 6 p.m. Location, HOA Community Hall. Failure to attend will result in fines and possible legal escalation. Signed, Cynthia Burton, Interim HOA President. I actually laughed out loud. They were serious. According to them, my own lake was now a shared community space. Somehow, in less than 48 hours, Cynthia had drummed up some new bylaw or resolution to try and claim it for the HOA, which of course held zero legal weight. But legalities had never stopped these people from flexing imaginary power. I picked up the phone and called my real estate attorney, Frank. He chuckled after I read him the letter. They're trying to gaslight you into giving up your rights. Don't worry, Mike, they don't have a leg to stand on. What do I do about the hearing? Show up, Frank said. Bring the deed, bring the county plat maps, and if you want, I'll come with you. Just know, this isn't about logic for them. It's about pride. I sighed. Yeah, it's personal now. Friday came fast. The community hall was packed, more than I expected. Probably half the neighborhood showed up to watch. HOA meetings were usually quiet affairs, but this one had energy, like a courtroom drama was about to unfold. Cynthia sat at the head of a long table, flanked by two other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was dressed like she was hosting a gala. Hair done up, pearl earrings, blazer with gold buttons. You could practically hear the click of her judgment. Mr. Lawson, she said, not bothering to smile. Thank you for attending. Let's begin. I'd like to record this meeting, I said. She paused. That won't be necessary. I smiled. Then I'll be leaving. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She scowled, then waved her hand. Fine. Proceed. I set my phone down and hit record. This is Michael Lawson. This recording is for personal legal protection. Cynthia cleared her throat and looked directly at me. You have been accused of interfering with HOA activities, endangering residents with unregulated equipment, and verbally harassing community members on shared property. I raised an eyebrow. Which property? The lake, she said firmly. Interesting, I said, pulling out the same folder I'd given Officer Ramirez. I laid it on the table and flipped it open. This is the deed showing I own the lake, its bed, the shoreline, and 20 feet of land in every direction from the water's edge. It predates the formation of the HOA by 12 years. I handed a copy to each of the board members. Cynthia didn't even glance at it. We believe, she continued, that the lake has served as an informal community gathering space for years. That makes it communal by default. There it was, the HOA's favorite trick. If they used something long enough, they thought it became theirs by magic. That's not how property law works, I said calmly. Informal use doesn't transfer ownership. She narrowed her eyes. Then why did you allow community events in the past? Because I believe in kindness, I said. I never stopped anyone from fishing. I only asked for respect. What I got instead was trespassing, threats, attempted theft, and your husband falling into the lake after trying to remove my private property with hired muscle. Gasps and scattered chuckles came from the crowd. Cynthia slammed her gavel. Order. Your husband nearly got someone hurt, and now you're trying to paint me as a threat because I stopped him. One of the other board members, a skinny guy in glasses named Ray, leaned forward. Mrs. Burton, this deed, it's very clear. I don't think we have jurisdiction here. Cynthia shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. I will not let this man hold the community hostage. I'm not holding anyone hostage, I said. I'm protecting what's mine. She stood up, voice rising. Then I'll see you in civil court. Already filed a preemptive injunction, I replied. You'll be receiving it Monday morning. If this HOA attempts to access my lake without permission, you'll be violating state property laws, and if you try to find me again, I'll press for harassment. Now the crowd was buzzing. Some of them were whispering to each other. Others nodded at me, realizing maybe they'd been lied to. Cynthia's face burned red, but she didn't say another word. I packed up my folder, picked up my phone, and walked out. Outside the hall, a few neighbors caught up to me. Hey, Lawson, one man said. We didn't know they were doing all this behind our backs. Most of us thought the lake was part of the HOA. It's not, I said, but I've never had a problem with people enjoying it. Just don't trash it. That's all I've ever asked. He nodded. You need anything, you let us know. It felt good. Really good. But that didn't last long, because 2 days later I woke up to the sound of boat engines. I stepped out onto the dock and what I saw made my stomach turn. Cynthia had organized an emergency community fishing day. Dozens of people were out on the lake, most of them strangers. Loud music blared from a speaker system set up on a barge, and coolers were dumped right into the shallow edge like they were throwing a party at a hotel pool. But the worst part? They had a massive vinyl banner hung between 2 trees. It read, Lake Burton, property of the people. My lake. And that was the final straw. I stared at the banner fluttering in the wind like a slap in the face. Lake Burton, property of the people. They renamed my lake. I walked down to the dock slowly, Duke at my side, trying to keep calm, but everything in me was screaming. It wasn't just the noise or the litter or the banner. It was the arrogance, the sheer entitlement. I saw kids jumping from the dock into the water unsupervised, grown adults tossing beer cans into the reeds, loud music blasting lyrics that echoed into the woods. And at the center of it all, Cynthia Burton. She stood on a floating platform with a microphone, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses like she was hosting a lakefront music festival. Welcome, neighbors, she said into the mic. Let's show that one man can't keep what belongs to us all. Cheers erupted. That was it. I turned around, went back into my house and opened my safe. Inside were the documents I never wanted to use, but I kept them just in case. The original zoning paperwork, the environmental reports, and most importantly, the water usage rights filed with the county years ago. I'd spent thousands of dollars getting that paperwork done when I bought the property. Everyone thought I was crazy. Who spends money filing for control over water access and fishing rights on a dead lake? Well, me. And now, it was time to use them. I called Frank again. They did what? He shouted through the phone. Rename the lake, I said, stuffing the documents into a folder. Put up banners, brought in speakers. They've got nearly 40 people out there. It's a full-blown HOA block party on my lake. Frank's voice went deadly calm. Mike, they're in violation of at least 6 local laws. I'll call the county water board. You call the sheriff. And what if they won't leave? There was a pause. Then it's time to shut the lake down. I made the calls. The sheriff's office said they were dispatching a deputy, but it might take time because of the crowd size. Meanwhile, Frank got confirmation from the county. Yes, I had the legal right to restrict all access, especially with signs of reckless behavior and littering. So I grabbed a bullhorn, and I walked back down to the dock. Attention, everyone! I yelled over the music. This is private property. You are trespassing. This lake is privately owned and has never been HOA jurisdiction. They booed. Someone shouted, "Go home, man, you can't stop a party." I held up a large waterproof sign I'd made years ago in case of emergencies. It read, "Private lake, no public access, trespassing enforced by law." Then I hit the kill switch. Literally. See, I had installed a remote circuit box tied to the dock's power years ago for safety during storms. That circuit controlled the floating platform's lights and the speaker system they'd connected to my dock's power without permission. In an instant, the music cut off. The speakers fizzled. Cynthia's microphone went dead. And just like that, the party started unraveling. "What's going on?" someone yelled. "Where's the music?" another complained. I lifted the bullhorn again. "This is your final warning. Leave the lake or face legal action. The sheriff is on the way." Some people started packing up. A few quickly turned their kayaks around and paddled off. But Cynthia, she grabbed a handheld mic connected to a backup speaker. "This man is trying to intimidate us with legal mumbo-jumbo. Don't give in to him, he doesn't own nature." I stepped forward. "No," I said calmly, "but I do own this lake, and I can prove it in court." The crowd started murmuring. Some people looked uncomfortable now. Others were clearly debating whether staying was worth it. Then it happened. A loud horn blared from the edge of the lake. 2 sheriff's department vehicles had arrived, red and blue lights flashing against the trees, and behind them, a truck with a large seal on the side. County Water Conservation Department. Cynthia's face turned white. The officers got out and began speaking to groups of people, asking them to leave the lake immediately. A few folks tried to argue, but the deputies were firm. "You're on private property," they repeated. "You can be fined or arrested." Within 15 minutes, the lake was nearly empty, but Cynthia stood her ground. "This is tyranny," she snapped at the county rep. "He can't just kick the community off a lake we've used for years." The woman from the water board flipped through a clipboard and held up a map. "Mrs. Burton, the lake is on record as being wholly owned by Mr. Lawson. You've received cease and desist notices. You've been trespassing. And by organizing an unsanctioned event here, you've opened the HOA up to liability and environmental citations." Cynthia looked like her world was caving in. "You can't do this," she whispered. I stepped up beside the officer. "I didn't want it to come to this. I never had a problem with people fishing or kids swimming, but you crossed the line, again and again." She stared at me. "You embarrassed my husband." "No," I said. "He embarrassed himself." With that, the officers escorted Cynthia to the waiting patrol car, not under arrest, but for a formal statement. And as she sat in the back seat, the county rep handed me a clipboard. "We've closed the lake for investigation," she said. "You'll have full authority to press charges for property damage and unauthorized use." I looked out across the now quiet water. The banner had been taken down. Trash was being cleaned up. The party was over. But something else was brewing, something deeper. Because 3 days later I got a notice nailed to my gate. The HOA was suing me for emotional distress, disruption of community activity, and deliberate humiliation. And this time, they had lawyers, real ones, but they had no idea what they were walking into next. The notice on my gate flapped in the wind like a warning flag. "You are hereby notified of pending civil litigation." Cynthia and the HOA were suing me for everything they could think of: emotional distress, community unrest, public humiliation, even claiming my ownership of the lake created a hostile living environment. The thick packet included 26 pages of complaints, most of which sounded like they were written by someone with a personal vendetta. And that's because they were. The worst part? It wasn't just Cynthia's name on the papers. 7 other homeowners had signed on, people I used to wave at, people who had walked their dogs near my fence or borrowed firewood when the winter storms hit. Now they were in on it too. Why? Because Cynthia convinced them that my lake was hurting the neighborhood's togetherness. I called Frank. He read through the packet and chuckled darkly. "This isn't a lawsuit, it's a hissy fit in legal form." "Can they win?" "No," Frank said flatly. "They've got no leg to stand on, but they can make your life annoying. You'll have to show up in court, respond to the complaint, and possibly file a counterclaim. And that's what they want, Mike. They're not trying to win, they're trying to wear you down." I exhaled deeply, leaning against the railing of the dock, watching Duke chase butterflies by the edge of the water. I didn't want a war. I just wanted peace. But they'd made it clear. They weren't stopping. "So what do we do?" I asked. Frank's voice turned sharp. "We hit back, not with anger, with truth, with every record, every video, every documented incident. We don't just defend, we expose." And that's exactly what we did. Over the next few weeks, Frank and I built our response. I handed over everything: deeds, survey maps, police reports, HOA letters, photos, footage from my dock cameras, even timestamps showing trash being dumped during HOA events. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't show up to HOA meetings. I didn't post on the community app. I didn't engage when Cynthia's followers tried to provoke me on walks. But something strange began to happen. Neighbors started coming by in secret. First was Nancy, a retired teacher from down the road. She showed up with a lemon pie and a quiet apology. "I didn't know," she said softly. "Cynthia told us you were some rich guy who bought the lake just to cut people off from nature." "I just wanted quiet," I said, "and maybe a little respect." She nodded. "Well, I'm telling the others the truth. Whether you win or lose in court, people need to know what's really going on." Then came Jordan, a young dad with 2 kids. "We don't want to be part of this lawsuit," he said quickly. "Can I sign something to say we don't support it?" Others followed, one by one peeling off from Cynthia's side, apologizing, bringing small gifts or notes of support. They were tired of the drama, tired of being lied to, tired of HOA politics bleeding into their peaceful lives. The court date arrived. It was a crisp morning when I walked into the county courthouse. Frank stood beside me in a navy suit, looking like a man ready to bury an empire. Across the aisle sat Cynthia, flanked by her lawyer, her arms crossed and lips tight like she was holding back a storm. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, began the session. "This court will now hear the matter of Burton et al. Versus Lawson regarding property disputes and claims of community disruption." Cynthia's lawyer started first, throwing out buzzwords: intimidation, public disrespect, property privilege, abuse of natural resources. The judge's expression didn't change once. Then it was our turn. Frank stood and presented everything. He was calm, methodical, brilliant. He showed the deed. He showed the HOA's lack of jurisdiction. He showed the sheriff's reports, the cease and desist orders, the county's statements confirming my ownership. He even played a short clip from my dock security cam showing Greg shouting, "We'll have it towed," just before falling into the lake. A few people in the courtroom snorted. Then Frank did something bold. He played one more clip. It was audio from Cynthia's Emergency Community Fishing Day. Her voice, loud and clear over the mic. "Let's show that one man can't keep what belongs to us all." The judge raised her hand. "That's enough." She looked over the courtroom. "It's clear Mr. Lawson owns the lake. He has every legal right to deny access. The HOA overstepped boundaries, repeatedly, and the plaintiffs have failed to present any valid claim of emotional or financial harm." She paused, then looked directly at Cynthia. "In fact, it appears this case was filed out of personal resentment and not based on any legal foundation." I held my breath. "This case is dismissed," the judge declared. "Furthermore, this court advises the HOA to reconsider its current leadership practices before further damage is done." Cynthia's jaw dropped. Her lawyer muttered something under his breath, already packing up. Frank turned to me, grinning. "Told you." Outside the courthouse, something even more shocking happened. The local news had picked up the story. A reporter approached me with a mic. "Mr. Lawson, do you have a message for the community?" I nodded. "I never wanted to shut anyone out. I just wanted peace and respect. Kindness goes a long way. That lake's always been mine, but it was never meant to be just for me." And then I added, "Unless you try to steal it." The camera guy chuckled. By the time I got home, the HOA group chat was imploding. Cynthia had resigned as president, blaming stress and betrayal. Greg was still laying low, and many of the board members had already begun pushing for reforms. But the final twist? 3 days after the ruling, a letter arrived, not from the HOA, from the county, and it said, "Notice of application approval, zoning update granted, request to rename registered natural body, Lake Lawson, effective immediately." They'd made their little Lake Burton banner, so I made a permanent sign of my own. And this time, it wasn't vinyl, it was steel. But the war wasn't over yet, because what the HOA tried next made everything before look like child's play. I didn't even get a full week to enjoy the court win before the next blow landed. Early one morning, I was sipping coffee out on the dock, watching the mist drift across Lake Lawson, when I heard tires crunching gravel near my gate. Duke perked up. I looked down the trail and saw a white SUV pull up, followed by another, then another. Within minutes, 6 SUVs lined up along my fence like a convoy. They didn't look like neighbors. They looked official. And they were. 2 men in suits stepped out, badges flashing in the sunlight. "Mr. Michael Lawson?" one asked, clipboard in hand. "Yeah," I said slowly. "What's going on?" "You're being served. Notice of environmental violations and unauthorized water use." I blinked. "Excuse me?" The man handed me a thick packet of papers. Again, another stack of legal nonsense. But this time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from the Environmental Stewardship Coalition, a group I'd never even heard of. As I skimmed the top pages, I realized what was happening. Cynthia had taken her fight to the state level. This group was accusing me of polluting the lake, overusing the water for private enrichment, and damaging local wildlife by restricting public ecological access. Frank called me before I could even dial his number. "I just got the filing," he said. "This woman doesn't know when to quit." How could she escalate it this far? She found a sympathetic activist group and sold them a story. They're using her testimony to open an investigation. I sighed. "What now?" He paused. "We fight back, but this one's going to get messy." And it did. Within days, people from the coalition were walking my shoreline in bright green vests, taking water samples, snapping photos, and interviewing nearby residents. One of them, a young woman named Sophie, approached me politely. "We're not here to hurt you," she said. "We were told you'd blocked a natural water source from the public." I raised an eyebrow. "Who told you that?" "We've received community reports," she said, carefully avoiding the name. "Did your reports also mention I clean this lake weekly, replant native grass, and single-handedly removed 3 truckloads of garbage the HOA left here after their events?" She blinked. "No." I invited her to see for herself. I gave her a tour, showed her the bee garden I planted to protect pollinators, the fish habitat I built with submerged crates to protect baby bass from birds, the water purification filters I personally installed along the runoff stream. Sophie didn't say much, but she took notes, a lot of them. By the end of the walk, she turned to me and said, "Honestly, you're doing more conservation work than most of the public parks I've visited." Still, the investigation went on. Meanwhile, Cynthia, though no longer HOA president, was more active than ever. She went door to door, gathering signatures for a petition to have Lake Lawson designated as a protected community landmark, despite it being privately owned. She wrote letters to the editor in the local paper, painting me as a greedy recluse hoarding nature like a dragon with gold. The public started turning again. I got cold stares at the grocery store, anonymous notes in my mailbox. "Nature belongs to everyone," one said, taped to my gate with duct tape. But then, something incredible happened. Sophie came back, not with hostility, with a camera crew. "We want to do a feature," she said. "Highlight what you're doing here, set the record straight." I was hesitant, but Frank encouraged it. So, we filmed. I took them through everything: how I bought the land after my divorce to heal, how the lake helped me through the darkest time of my life, how I'd never charged a soul to fish here and only asked people to respect the water. They captured Duke bounding through the grass, kids from the neighborhood helping me clean the shoreline, even shots of the bee garden in full bloom. When the story aired, it changed everything. The man behind Lake Lawson, the quiet steward of a community oasis. It exploded online. People who once ignored me started waving again. A local school asked if they could bring students for an environmental field day. Even the mayor sent a letter thanking me for preserving one of our region's most beautiful and responsibly maintained natural sites. The coalition quietly dropped the complaint. Sophie emailed me personally to say she'd resigned from the group, said it wasn't what she thought it was. And Cynthia? Oh, Cynthia. She went quiet. No more letters. No more petitions. For a while, I thought it was over. Until one night, around midnight, I woke to the sound of tires spinning in gravel. I stepped outside in my robe, flashlight in hand, Duke growling low beside me. And there, at the edge of the lake, I saw it. A flatbed trailer. With a backhoe. Someone was trying to dig into my land. And at the wheel? Greg Burton, fresh out of retirement, covered in mud, and holding a gas can. For a split second, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Greg Burton, former HOA president, lawsuit loser, man who once fell face first into the lake, was now standing in my yard in the middle of the night, holding a gas can. A gas can. The backhoe on the trailer still rumbled, its headlights flickering in the darkness like the eyes of a beast. He hadn't started digging yet, but the tracks were lowered, and he was close. Duke let out a snarl. I held him back with a hand, heart pounding in my chest. I raised my flashlight and called out loud and clear, "Greg, step away from the equipment. Drop the gas can." He froze. We locked eyes. Me, standing in my robe and boots with Duke beside me, and him, wild-eyed and shaking halfway between rage and desperation. "This was supposed to be mine," he spat. "That lake was always ours." I stepped forward carefully. "You lost, Greg. You don't have to do this." "She ruined everything," he screamed. "The HOA, my career, my name, and you embarrassed me, made me look like a joke. I was trying to fix it. I was going to make it right." I flicked on the floodlights around the dock. The entire shoreline lit up like a stage. That's when I saw what was inside the trailer bed. Several large drums. Not gas, fertilizer, mixed with fuel. That could be highly explosive. My blood ran cold. I didn't hesitate. I tapped the emergency alert on my phone, which sent a signal to the sheriff's department. I'd set it up months ago, just in case something like this ever happened again. "Greg," I said slowly, "you brought chemicals. What were you planning to do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he dropped the gas can and lunged for the backhoe lever. I sprinted forward. Duke barked and launched past me. Greg got one hand on the lever before I tackled him to the ground. He was strong, fueled by fury and madness, but I got him down, pinned beneath me on the muddy grass, yelling and twisting like a man possessed. Within 5 minutes, red and blue lights lit up the sky. The sheriffs arrived, sirens cutting through the still night. 2 officers pulled me off Greg, cuffed him, and hauled him to his feet. He was trying to start the backhoe. I gasped, still catching my breath. He had fertilizer in the trailer, and fuel. They looked at the trailer and swore under their breath. One deputy got on the radio. "Requesting hazmat team. Suspected explosive materials." Greg screamed the whole way to the cruiser. "You think you've won? I'll be back. You can't erase me." But this time, there was no way out for him. No HOA to protect him. No wife to spin stories. No petition to gather. Just cold metal cuffs and a long list of federal charges. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Local news picked up the story again. This time it wasn't about lake access. It was about attempted eco-terrorism. That's what they were calling it. Greg had planned to dig into the lake's filtration beds and dump fertilizer laced with diesel to contaminate the water. His goal, according to investigators, was to make the lake uninhabitable so I'd have nothing to fight over. He wanted to poison the lake out of spite. But thanks to Duke and a floodlight, he never got the chance. Cynthia? She vanished. Moved out of the neighborhood a week later. Rumors said she filed for divorce and changed her last name. The HOA was quiet for a long time after that. They held a vote 6 months later to restructure everything. A few neighbors even asked me if I'd be interested in joining the board. I politely declined. I didn't need power. I just wanted peace. Over the next year, Lake Lawson blossomed, literally. I got a grant from the county to build an official wildlife sanctuary around the shoreline. Schools brought kids out every spring. Photographers came to capture the sunrise. And slowly, people began to understand. This place wasn't mine because I fought for it. It was mine because I cared for it. I still let people fish, swim, watch birds. But now there's a sign at the dock entrance written in clean white letters, nailed into a cedar post. "Welcome to Lake Lawson." Respect the land, the water, and each other. And below that, in smaller letters, this isn't a rule, it's a reminder. Duke sits by the dock most evenings, keeping watch like the guardian he is. Sometimes I still think about Greg, about how far people will go to protect control, even over things that were never really theirs. But then I look out at the lake, calm, clean, and full of life, and I'm reminded, peace isn't given, it's made, one ripple at a time. If you enjoyed this jaw-dropping true story, don't forget to like the video and hit that notification bell so you never miss another insane HOA showdown. Have a story about a neighborhood nightmare? Drop it in the comments. We might just feature it next.